Hello everyone, it is the second lecture from the cycle of relations between men and women from the position of yoga. My name is Karani. Today we will talk about very difficult things. It is difficult to think about, but it's even more difficult to talk. Therefore do not judge. I repeat that the whole wisdom from the masters and all stupidity from me. If you feel something is wrong, then look for sources, try to study for yourself. I just summarize some information that I myself study, which I do and share with the other people. What for? In the first lecture, last time, I said, watch the previous video if there are any doubts that I have any selfish interest, not really. I work with this subject, but not only with it. These lectures are not what I do for a living. They are free. I do not sell them. Theory is not mine. I cannot sell it in any way. My own interest is only in the following. I want some more or less understandable, generally accessible conceptual base to be formed, and certain number of people to whom it all acceptable will be involved, who are interested in the problem of relationship of men and women in the context of yoga as I am. That is, for many lives. We understand more or less what a person is. How can we work on ourselves? We have a set of understandable definitions that we use in theory, in practice, in relationships and interactions with each other. The most unpleasant problems between the sexes and indeed between people arise first of all because we do not hear each other ideologically. We cannot speak each other's language in terms of ideology. It is very complex. After all, it doesn't matter what worldview, scientific, theological or whatever we have. Anyway, we need some conceptual base. If we, as a famous character of 12 Chairs, authors Ilf and Petrov, Ostap Bender, honor the criminal code, and then we have some understandable things that we have to recognize. We understand what is bad and what is good. It is the same here. If we by default use some definitions in some micro-society, I hope that someday it will become a yoga micro-society. We know that there are 3 principles of yoga. We know that it is highly desirable and absolutely necessary to rely on them in our relationships with other people. This eliminates a lot of problems that arise when people have no idea that these principles exist and that they are highly desirable to observe. At least at this level, it is not bad. Let's move on. There are many other different things that derive from the 3 principles of yoga. First of all, as at the last lecture, we have already decided on the concept of what a person is, but these are just concepts. The question is how we interpret all this in our ordinary life. There was a very popular idea in the West, I think, therefore I am. This Western philosophy deeply anchored in minds of people who subsequently engaged in modern science, began to develop science and promote progress. This concept is deeply rooted in the minds. Just like some remnants of Christian dogma foundations, we talk about this later. We are not considering my personal attitude to religions, but it exists in the Western space. At one time, Christianity and its branches played an important role, but ideology deeply anchored in people's mind. It began to be transmitted as part of some cultural traditions. Therefore, serious contradictions arise, including ideological conflicts, even at the concept of reincarnation and at the level of rebirth or heaven and hell. Even about these basic things, which are not as simple as they seem. Let's return to the idea I think, therefore I am. We live more in the sphere of our mental constructions, ideas, thoughts, hopes, analytics. We have an ongoing internal mental work. We either mull something over, that is, we constantly think about something, considering these thoughts as our own, or the thoughts that we accept, agree with them, or we are constantly constructing the future. We are trying to calculate something, somehow analyze what we will be and how it will be. Or we dig into the past, regret, doubt, or conversely dive into some pleasant moments, into some pleasant memories. As a rule, at these moments we rarely think about our physical body. Last time we talked that a person is impossible without a physical body. If there is no physical body, then we cannot say that we are people. On the other hand, very often we ignore our physical body at all, because mostly we live at this level, I think, therefore I am. As a consequence, we constantly have some imbalance. The imbalance when we are either do not look after our physical body at all, as we should, so that at least it does not cause real troubles, so that it does not fall apart when we are 30, 40 years old. On the other hand, if we cherish our physical body too much, then everything else suffers. That is, a certain level of analytics and mental constructing of the future and something else. We will talk about this later for what it is and how it can be used. We consider imbalance to one side or another. On the other hand, if we slip into the level of the physical body, then we also cannot say that the physical body and the person is the same thing. There is a well-known robot Sophia, a lot of videos on the internet about it. It is already in popularity ahead of Elon Musk, probably. The special silicon shell was created to robot Sophia. This is a robot with human facial expressions. She has a human face, humanoid, let's say. Sophia uses artificial intelligence. Sophia also imitates human gestures and facial expressions of a real person. She also imitates meaningful answers and adequate reactions. I recently saw a video in which she flirted with a famous actor. It was very funny and she really did well in female facial expressions. All these tricks. It was very interesting to watch. Indeed, you look and it seems so fun. It is not even clear whether this is a person or not. You won't figure it out. If they didn't cut her half head and had some hair glued from a distance, it would have been impossible to distinguish her from a real person. You understand that this is not a person. There is no component of something higher. In yoga, this higher is called Atma or Atman. This is our higher self. The next problem. We decided that we need both body and mental activity. At the same time, this should be animated and livened by our higher self. Yoga has its own theory of how it all happens by means of prana. Who needs to know more, look in the appropriate sources. The problem is that we often take our ego for our higher self. We begin to confuse egoism with what we really are. People who overcome the idea I think therefore I am, who understand that mind is mind, we can use it, but a person does not equal to mind. These people, as a rule, slip into another extreme. My higher self is equal to the ego, my personality. All the so-called personal growth courses, everything connected with the personality, this is in fact about ego. Yoga says that our higher self are not ego. There is a special definition for the ego. In Sanskrit, it is called ahamkara. Read about it too. This is closest to what is considered as a selfishness in Western philosophy. In yoga, on the contrary, it is recommended in due time to begin to slowly realize that we are not the ego. Moreover, it is recommended to slowly begin to refuse the selfishness at some moments, at some points, to neglect our ego. Not at all, of course. The ego is a useful thing. There would be no ego, we would not have developed as a conditionally dominant species on the earth. When we begin to work on ourselves, when we begin to understand that there are other people, that they need help, that this makes sense, then we should start to keep the ego under control. When the ego is still strong, it turns out that we do not reduce our problems, but only on the contrary, we inflate them every time. When we draw on the ego, it is impossible to solve fundamental problems, including in the male and female interaction, because from this position, they simply cannot be solved. You can try to do it. There is such a wonderful thing as psychology. There are various psychotechniques, psychotrainings, and other things. They work with the mind directly with selfishness, but there is nothing said about the concept of the higher self. In psychology, nothing is said about freedom increase. That is more and more awareness of what we are and what we are not. Rather, it is a set of tools that allows you to walk from the ego level. Of course, you may stay at this level for years and even lives. But you can try to reach a higher level, and then all these problems will simply disappear. They will not need to be addressed. They will be solved by themselves. From a level above, some more mundane problems disappear by themselves. There is no need to waste time solving them. One more thing, it follows directly from the fact that most often we mean ego by ourselves. It is a mixture of ego and mind, our mind plus ego, to whom it is convenient, to whom what combination is more pleasant. It is that we rigidly identify ourselves and our problems with a certain gender. Indeed, there is such that, being born incarnating a certain gender in this life, we automatically accept some rules of the game. In fact, the body and gender is conditioned by a lot, by not all. But not all. Therefore, if we begin to slowly get rid of selfishness, with the right portions, let's say with the right methods, slowly we are reaching the level of understanding what we really are. Then these problems begin to disappear. Of course, if we rigidly identify ourselves, I am a woman, I do not understand men and cannot understand them. I have some kind of mindset caused by hormones, caused by my body problems, which men also cannot understand because they are men. And that's all. This contradiction is unsolvable. With such a position, in fact, there is no sense to try to solve something. If all this is taken for granted, in fact, there is no sense at all in understanding this all. The fact that you are of some gender deprives you of a chance to understand the opposite sex. Indeed, if we try to solve these problems at the ego level, at the level of personality, at the level of mind, this, however, is meaningless. At best, this is poking around at one level, but fundamentally it does not solve anything. On the other hand, our higher self is asexual. According to yoga, in one life we can be born of one sex, in another life of another sex. This is constantly alternating with some periodicity. According to our will, in some life we are born a man, in some life we are born a woman. It is constantly alternating. Accordingly, if we take into account this fact, then the very part of the spark of the higher, which animates everything, including our mind and everything else, every our structure, has nothing to do with sex. From this level, problems really simply disappear. The closer we get to the realization of what we really are, the less problems we have in intersexual interaction. The more chances we have to solve these problems effectively. At least we realize that it is an illusion that exists exclusively within the manifested universe, from the moment we are born to the moment we die. And In other moments, these problems simply do not exist. The higher self is free from the concept of gender. Accordingly, it turns out that when we reach this level, we gracefully solve these problems, excluding tough self-identification. Because the worst thing is to hold on to some specific concepts very deeply that does not lead to liberation from these same conventions. Maybe the way I said it is hard to understand. There is a very good aphorism in text of 108 aphorisms of Tantra Yoga appeal to the yogi. Be careful. The manifestation of consciousness may indicate the path to enlightenment, or it may be some dry, lifeless series of abstract theories. Indeed, there is such system that seem to be correct, well built logically. But at the same time, they do not give an answer to some basic things. One more basic thing, oddly enough, it is the concept that there are many lives, the concept of many births and many deaths, the concept of reincarnation. Those philosophical systems in which this is not recognized or hushed up, they simply do not have a tool to solve the problem at the level of intersexual interaction. This is all very complicated and not obvious. If we do not recognize the concept of the higher self, we do not recognize the concept that it is higher than the concept of gender. If we do not recognize the concept that our bodies are like a jacket, which we can put on and take off every day. Today is red, tomorrow is green. Here is the same thing. In one life, the body of a woman, in other, the body of man. Then 5 lives in a row again, the body of a woman, and then again the body of a man. And after 2 lives, they wanted to be a female and were born as a man, and this is a problem, which is now called sexual minorities and is not considered a problem. Thanks God, everyone is free to live as they want. Strong self-identification does not allow to solve these problems. Those philosophical systems, or so to say knowledge systems, can be called differently, which do not give this knowledge. It is very difficult to resolve anything during the current life. Why? Let us take such a prime example as jealousy, a very large and, as it seems to us, absolutely unsolvable problem. Psychologists, sexologists and philosophers are struggling with it. Writers describe all this in their works. Even our criminal code does not pass over this issue. There is even a separate article of crimes of passion. There is a real problem. You can try to solve it on the basis that it is a given, that it is implanted in ourselves and we can do nothing about it. Here's such a nature that all men are womanizers, there are women, but this is rather the exception. This is also a problem. Women generally have no right to act the same as men, because it is a crime by itself for a woman, such a logic in a patriarchal society. But what is the solution? What are we coming to? Just take it and firmly ban it? It does not work. Just allowing everything to everyone does not work. None of extremes work. Even some middle ways do not work either, because it is a lie. Without lies, it is impossible to solve the problem. If there is a lie, then the problem is already formed in itself, because everything secret sooner or later becomes obvious. We know about it. Therefore, the criminal code has a corresponding article. I am sorry to say so hard, but how else to explain? But it's clear. Now consider the concept of yoga, the concept of rebirth and many lives. Imagine you have your beloved person, beloved girl or beloved man in this life. You have a complete harmony. You live in a complete harmony. And in a past life, you had other person also with whom you lived your whole life in a complete harmony, loved each other very much. But it so happened that in this life you did not meet. You were born in one hemisphere, she or he in another hemisphere. And it so happened that at the age of 40 you met that person from your past life. He is exactly the same. You also loved each other, only it was then and it is now. Well, tell me, why is this a crime? What if we look at categories that do not absorb the concept of many lives? What to do here? You won't do anything, and it becomes clear. Or maybe there were several people, and if we consider the context of many lives, that in every life was such a person, maybe not one, and now imagine that you meet them all in one life. Perhaps in part that this can explain the Casanova phenomenon, who claimed that he loved every woman, I believe willingly. The French have a saying, there can be a lot of love and all of this is real. Popular wisdom. Anything can happen. It all depends on karmic condition. In fact, indeed, there are monogamous people. I believe it willingly. We will also talk about why some people constantly need a change of partner and someone with one is good and pleasant all their lives. This is also possible. The first, it is really karma. That is, our past actions determine our current position in this life, including with the opposite sex. The second thing I will say looking ahead, this is the amount of prana, the life force that we have at our disposal. It absolutely does not depend on any gender affiliation. If a man or a woman has a large amount of prana, they can never be limited to one partner. This is standard logic. If a person have a choice either to direct prana to digest food for survival or to amorous feeds, guess what he will choose? Or a person has a prana for exactly one sexual partner and exactly for digesting food. There is no more prana. Surely we are not talking about other partners. Neither he or she needs anything in life except for one partner. Therefore, those who say that there should be one true love and those who think that there can be a lot of love are both right. To a large extent, everything is due to the amount of free prana that we have at our disposal. We will talk about this concept later. Because how many copies were broken, how many angry letters were received, how many discussions on this topic have been deployed. Frothing at the mouth, patriarchal dogmatics proved that women is monogamous and men are polygamous in nature. Feminists shouted that nothing like that, everyone is equal. As a result, whatever one may say, everyone is right and everyone is mistaken. If we do not apply the concept of prana, the life force that revives us, which is spent on ensuring all our life, it is difficult to explain. What remains in the free balance, this amount determines whether we need more partners, whether we are ready to get all these aspects of energy and consciousness quickly, or it's barely enough for one partner to procreate at least. We remember that, first of all, sexual excess is spent on these.
Все зависит на самом деле. Как это ни странно, может быть, для кого-то это печально. Простите, если я чьи-то романтические настроения разрушаю, но моя задача такая: говорить, что знаю. Говорить так, как оно есть в йоге. То есть можно признавать, можно не признавать, можно кипятиться, можно тихо рыдать, но факт есть факт. То есть я призываю только к одному: рассуждать, стараться как можно больше думать на эту тему и пытаться понять, где возникают нестыковки, почему так, а не по-другому. Потому что только направляя свой разум на какие-то определенные вещи, мы имеем шанс высветить те проблемы, которые обычно остаются на самой такой крайней, да, вот оно зреет, и в итоге бах, вулкан взорвался, да, и все, и там уже Помпеи дальше, последний день. Вот чтобы до этого не доводить, нужно заранее понемножечку вот так вот грызть по чуть-чуть, пытаться в это как-то хоть одним глазком заглянуть.
It all depends on it, oddly enough. Maybe for some people this is sad. Sorry if I destroy someone's romantic mood. My task is to say what I know, to speak how it is in yoga. You can recognize, you cannot recognize. You can boil, you can sob quietly. Fact is fact. I call for only one thing, to reason, try to think on this topic as much as possible and try to understand where inconsistencies arise, why it happens this way and not differently. Only by directing our mind to certain specific things we have a chance to highlight those problems that usually remain in the blind zone. They ripen there and then suddenly bang, and the volcano exploded, and that's all. The last day of Pompeii. To avoid it, you need to bite a little bit in advance. Try to look into it with at least one eye. This is important. We return to our example with jealousy. If we use the concept of reincarnation, it becomes clear. Another question is what to do with it. Firstly, there is such an emphasis on our future lives. It may happen that in the current life we will not be able to do anything. It depends on how tough, difficult our situation, as far as we ourselves have limited our freedom by certain actions entering into this or that relationship with this or other people. How many debts we have already put on ourselves, which we cannot just take and say that I changed my mind. Such things are okay. When you either decide now or then, do not show off. This is the case with the birth of children. You either immediately decide for yourself that this person suits me as the father of my future children. That's all. If you give birth to children, then you should bring them up. Either you think seriously before and understand whether the person is suitable or not, but not when you already had children and start to think, it seems that he does not suit me. No, friends, it is necessary to arrange the problems in time correctly. Then there will be no collisions in the future. Let's go further. How can the knowledge that our life is not unique and there will be more lives help us? We understand that the cause of those consequences that we now take as given have already been formed. They are our future lives. The course of this life and what will happen in our future lives will depend on what we do now. Here arises the practical moment of applying the knowledge of Tantra Yoga, the knowledge of yoga associated with the relationship of men and women, for the correct information of associative links arise, because everything is built on it exactly. Correct associative links along which our life force will be directed in the future, our prana, which is able to revive anything and destroy anything. Now working on ourselves, we are lying what will happen later in this life and in the next lives. Quick methods are so called because doing the right actions during this life, we can very quickly resolve some problems so that we do not even notice that they simply disappear. In the practices of Tantra Yoga, there are many different tools. Natya Yoga helps very well, oddly enough. It is as applied to all tantric practices that Natya Yoga is a very powerful tool. This is not just a children's play working out some things. No, here is a deeper philosophy. No need to hide the largest number of tantric practices are the so-called imitation practices. They do not directly engage in sex but work with the sexual energy. Why is Tantra Yoga and all associated yoga considered as fast methods? Because it involves sexual energy. The most powerful thing, if we engage this in action by correctly dosing, correctly arranging, correctly using in certain practices, in a certain context, we are able to unleash our rigid associative links, which in the future could lead to the development of karmic scenarios. When we get on the forehead with a thumb rake from life to life. Even in the course of one life, this constantly happens. Question: why does it happen so constantly for me? Apparently someone put a jinx on me, apparently something is wrong with me. I always have the same scenario. Well, yes. Karma goes in cycles, and how a bad record is played in a circle. It is being played, and we are not doing anything about it. Then how else can this all develop if we do nothing with it? We do not work on ourselves, we do not redirect our attention, our consciousness, and our energy to solve this. We are looking for magic pills. Who only where does not look for them? Psychology is not so bad. Brain and is at least busy with something which is already good. And those who go into some kind of magic and esotericism, you ask guys, what everything is built on, and they respond, I don't know, it works somehow, it helps, and okay, but you need to know. I do not know, of course, but for me personally it is hard to take anything stupidly on faith. I cannot say that I don't care. If it suits me, if it suits someone, so good. These people usually have religions and sects. There is no need to understand. You can come and they will do something for you conditionally, pull the beard, do the puja, and you will be okay. Good. If someone needs this, they should not be here. But you can listen. All of a sudden, it will help.
Оно действительно есть. То есть, если мы говорим, здесь добавляется как раз к рождению и смерти третий момент – секс. Он, строго говоря, имеет ровно такую же силу, как эти два момента. Наш вход в этот мир.
If there is a desire to have knowledge, understand and take responsibility for your life, then the theory of yoga is what you need. Here we come close to how all these practices work. I already said that they directly engage in sexual energy, and this is not necessarily sex on a physical level. Of course, such practices also exist. There is yoga of union, which is suitable for people of certain mentality, certain karmic prints. Such people do not have either a denial of sex or something like a panically feeling of or never, and it is perceived as an ordinary part of life. In this case, a very good healthy feeling of something higher in relation to sex. It really is. The third thing is added to birth and death sex. Sex has exactly the same power as the moment of birth and the moment of death. Our entry into this world, our exit from this world, and the third component. I hope that not many people left who think that a person comes into the world at the moment of birth. Everyone knows perfectly well that there is intrauterine development, that the fetus develops there, it somehow behaves there, moves, and this is a living person in the womb. Accordingly, the question is, at what point does a person come to life, so to speak? That is, it turns from two cells into something living. That's right, at the moment when conception occurs. At this very moment, according to the yoga knowledge, a new life is emerging. This happens at the moment when the mom and dad have sex. This is the third component equivalent to the other two. The moment when we were born is the moment when for two it is sex and the third is born. This is one, it is tied together. Here we cannot throw death out of context when we are identified and leave this world. Leaving this world leads to the next birth. This is a continuous chain of the three: birth, sex, and death. They are constantly replacing each other. One flows into the other. It is impossible to do something without any of these three. With death, of course, a little more complicated, because we are all afraid of death. We do not understand what it is, we do not even imagine. We only see that the person was alive, and then once the breathing stopped, and that's it, man has died. However, we do not understand what happens next. From this it becomes scary. In Tantra Yoga, there is a theory that we invented death by ourselves. We will talk about this later, but I will say some words ahead. We get too confused. Now imagine, if there were no death, if you do not take into account the concept of future lives. I hear from people such a phrase very often: we live once. This logic leads to all the problems that arise in future lives, because ignorance of the law does not exempt from liability for its failure to comply. For some reason, I often recall recently all these legal formulations, but it really looks like one to the other. The fact that we do not know or do not want to know that we will be born again does not mean that we will not be born again. That is the problem. We think that we live here and now, and only one life we live once, and therefore everything is possible. Hence a large number of problems and errors arise. It is our internal structures that are beginning to push us towards such thought. And you are old already. A lot of time has passed. Let's do something like this for the last time. Or it's time to give birth to children, but you have none. Take the first one, or it will be too late. These moments cause a large number of mistakes. We think that if we do not do it now, then we will do it never. If we do not have time before death, then everything will end and we will not have a second chance. We created death as a second chance, chance after chance. Then, when we get entangled more and more, living this world is a chance to start everything from scratch. Of course, there are some connections left. Of course, there remain some tendencies, cliches of behavior that are being dragged from one life to another. Last time we talked about this, but to a large extent, death is the highest ability of our higher self to realize its real freedom. Our true freedom is realized through the expression of will. We have expressed our will to use our freedom in this way because it was probably the most profitable algorithm of all that we could imagine.
Искусственное оплодотворение, там пробирки, суррогатные матери и все дела, ну какая разница? То есть, по сути, мы никуда не можем деться от процесса того, что что-то соединилось, мужское и женское, из этого чего-то появилось что-то новое.
Thanks to the death, we have a new chance to unravel. Yes, falling to the bottom, yes, making mistakes and hit fanaticism, nihilism, atheism, and so on. At some point, pushing ourselves over the edge, we understand that no matter what happens, life has a continuation. Even if we die, the impulse of life will pass on, because at the time of sex, a new life comes from conception. The impulse of life goes further. Yes, this is another higher self, but we have transmitted from ourselves at least the body. Now, of course, I do not consider artificial insemination, in vitro surrogate mothers, but what's the difference? We cannot avoid the process of something male and female connecting and something new appearing. Most of the human population reproduce in a standard way. This cannot be rejoiced. In fact, I do not know what will happen next, but so far so good. In fact, fear and death is a fundamental fear. We really do not know and do not know what is going on. We have not been taught this. Plus, we must also take into account the fact that Western culture, if I may say so, although a lot of people shout about some Slavic self-identification, Western European, let's leave it all. We live on the Eurasian continent, at least in this central part, which is called Europe, Eastern, Western Europe, whatever, plus America. So in the Western mentality culture, there is such a concept of is accepted that there is only one life, and after this life either heaven or hell, to each their own. In Eastern philosophy, the opposite, India, Tibet, Nepal, and other pre-Himalayan countries, there is the concept of rebirth initially forms the correct attitude, respectful, correct attitude to children, to the transfer of life, to the fact that sex is something sacred. This is the first moment. The second point, yes, there will be death, but do not be afraid. This is the same natural process as Adam. This is not more terrible or scary than having sex, than giving birth to another person. It turns out to be hard at the level of affection. We become attached to some person and they die. Then we condole for years, remember for years, cannot let go of our own associations, while the person who died was born long ago and most likely somewhere in our circle, because as a rule, if there was a strong connection, then we will not go far from each other. Maybe it is better to look around, maybe it is already possible to communicate for a long time, and we are somewhere in the past 20 years ago. We yearn for our deceased relatives or someone. This is, of course, is a little primitive, excuse me. It seems that I am talking so easily about very complex things, but believe me, this knowledge is passed through myself. I am also a living person. Some of my close people also died. Of course, I had to rethink all this, and of course, it can be difficult. Similarly, when you break up with your loved one, of course, all this is very depressing, and there is a wish to start doing stupid things, start acting according to the scenario that was constantly playing. But at some point you start to catch yourself on the fact that you give in. That if you give in, then you will get that. Then what you will get in the future? you will get exactly the same scenario. What's the sense of it? Why is it so much harder for the Westerns? We have no concept of many lives. It must be accepted, understood, and reflected on this subject. But death has also been turned into something terrible and taboo. Sorry for the religious slang, but one kind of symmetry can lead to something very gloomy and very unpleasant. I don't know why and what about others, but all these ceremonies and everything else practically iconizing of a dead body which they just do not dance with, and then in Africa they say they even dance. First the bear eats somewhere, then something else. It seems that a much more civilized approach is competent disposal cremation. Cremation is a very humane thing. The place does not take, nothing is clogged anywhere. Everything is decorous, beautiful, and civilized, but that's my personal opinion. I do not impose it on anyone. At some moments, when you practice yoga, you begin to come to the conclusion that the second principle of yoga, the principle of common sense and rationality, begins to imprint itself and permeates all your thoughts. Even thinking about your own death, at some point you begin to think that you should write a testament of cremation, because I do not want to occupy the extra 4 square meters for what? I personally am more pleased to think that my mortal remains will not occupy the extra 4 square meters of land that could be useful to someone. The dead don't need them anyway, and the memory remains in the memory and not somewhere in any particular piece of land. This is the question of death.
Многие люди вообще до того доходят, что не думай об этом, чтобы не привлечь это в свою жизнь. Тут думай, не привлекай, мы все равно все рано или поздно умрем. То есть перейдем из одного состояния в другое. Что толку, что ты думаешь или не думаешь, это в принципе неизбежно. Я лично еще ни одного бессмертного не встречала, не знаю как вы. Поэтому немножко, мне кажется, нерационально упускать это в принципе из своего внимания. Тем более, если мы рассуждаем о проблемах взаимодействия мужчины и женщины, мы никак не можем обойти тему смерти. Ну, не получится. Если честно, в свое время я начала изучать восточные философские системы именно потому, что меня очень сильно интересовал вопрос смерти. И в какой-то момент мне, то есть родители, видя, что я глотаю тоннами эти религиозные справочники, какие-то мифы древние, еще что-то, они подумали, что я просто увлекаюсь восточной философией, подсунули мне книжку по йоге. Собственно, с этого в 16 лет моя практика йоги и началась. А на самом деле интересовал меня немножко другой момент. Но в итоге родители оказались правы. В йоге я в самом деле со временем нашла ответ, в том числе...
I especially talk on topics that are usually either in the taboo zone or we try not to think about them. Because this is something unpleasant. Many people get to the point that they don't think about it so as not to bring it to their lives. We all die sooner or later, think or not think. Let's move from one state to another. What is the use of what you think or not think? This is inevitable. I personally have not met a person, an immortal person. Therefore, it seems to me not rational to miss this from my attention. And moreover, if we talk about the problems of interaction between men and women, we cannot get around the topic of death. We simply cannot. At one time I began to study Eastern philosophical systems because I was very interested in the issue of death. My parents saw me reading religious books, ancient myth and so on in great numbers. They thought that I was just fond of Eastern philosophy and gave me a yoga book. From this, at 16, my yoga practice began. In fact, I was interested in a slightly different point. As a result, my parents turned out to be right. In yoga, in fact, I found the answer, including to this question. This is only system whose answer suited me and still suits me. Something else did not work out in all the rest, at least for me. So, if we take into account that we will be born again, that we will have the same problems or some other problems, but they will. That now definitely it makes sense to start discussing, thinking and doing something on this topic. The entire arsenal of Tantra Yoga practices from subtle and barely perceptible to tangible physical ones, is precisely designed to do this. That is, make good causes for the future. This including the work with associative relations, work on breaking patterns of behavior, which partly is due to our current life, our education in this life, and everything else, those layers that we got long before that. Why in these practices of Tantra Yoga? Of course, this is slowly being practiced in simple practices such as Hatha Yoga, where there is yoga, where is our yoga mat and our body, and nothing else is needed for this. Kriya Yoga, Pranayama Yoga, etc. What is good in practices of Tantra Yoga? They directly engage in sexual energy. This is our most powerful resource. By using it, we get such prints that it is very difficult to develop and launch in ourselves by some other practices. That is why these methods are considered fast. Oddly enough, I very often encounter the fact that people have been doing regular yoga for years but could not reach the level of sensation of prana in the body. They did not manage to reach the level of sensation of subtle structures when practicing Hatha Yoga, Kriya Yoga, Mantra Yoga, and Pranayama Yoga. This is what in theory should lead yoga to the level of working with thoughts forms, to be able to reduce them and ideally completely stop thought formation. Well, somehow it does not add up. When people begin to practice the simplest at the first glance practices from the arsenal of Tantra Yoga, where the yoga of sexual union may not be directly involved and the work takes place at the level of Tantra Yoga practices, that is, some approximations and distances, internal processes begin to accelerate, and in our usual practice of physical yoga, we begin to go to the level of sensation of prana in the body. We start to feel it. It is really possible. I know such examples. It actually works, because it is a powerful accelerator. When we use sex, mutual stimulation between the sexes is fuel for practice. It launches such secret processes that begin to make miracles. The body is completely rebuilt. At the level of some internal associative links, a powerful restructuring begins. This is a separate huge layer of theory and practice. Now I will not have time to say about this. In the following lectures we will talk about this more. The arsenal of tools and methods is very large. Indeed, the thing which uses the energy of sex can trigger internal transformation that will occur faster. It will very quickly pull a person to new levels. Then the only question is to stay at the level, and in order to stay at this level, you must have a personal practice, Hatha Yoga, Pranayama Yoga, and other yogas. It is no secret that Pranayama Yoga was derived from sexual practices. They restart naturally. There the body and breathing rebuilds itself and the body begins to breathe differently. The only question is whether this can be tracked and used somehow, then somehow manage it and try to transfer it into your usual practice if necessary. But breathing definitely begins to rebuild and internal processes begin at the level of sensation of pranic flows. This is definitely there. You can go one way for a while. The question is how ready we are. Sexual practices are everyone's personal business. Someone is practicing somehow. Someone has a major partner with whom this can be done, while someone does not. But there is a huge quantity of so-called imitation practices. They also allow you to achieve very good results at the level of unleashing rigid associations, rigid concepts, and even at the level of upgrade, so to speak, of our usual personal yoga practice. This is very powerful accelerator. The only question is not to be carried away, because where very strong energies are involved, it can take far and for a long time. Here is a theory.
Какие-то системы, это не редкость на самом деле, очень многие секты этим грешат, что берется какая-то часть истинного знания, и на нее сверху наворачивается какой-то жуткий ком из каких-то, я не знаю, специфических культурных наслоений, специфических какой-то обрядовости, еще чего-то, что по сути само по себе, да, хорошо для определенного круга людей в определенных обстоятельствах, но...
As for the second principle of yoga, this is the principle of logic that I already mentioned today. Life itself, this impulse of life that arises at the moment of entering this world, is activated during life, during sex, and is transformed, partly dissolves at the moment of disidentification, dying. This impulse of life itself is superlogical. We cannot comprehend it with logic. We only understand what it is. Something was transformed, something was gone. We cannot grab it. On the other hand, logic is absolutely necessary so that we do not deify our own stupidity. A very common story, many sects do it, some part of true knowledge is taken and then a terrible layer of some specific culture layers, some specific rituals and something else that is good in itself for a certain circle of people in certain circumstances is added to it from above. But it does not carry within itself a grain of truth. How to recognize this impulse and the knowledge that helps to work with it from what it is not and detracts. This is where logic can help. You need to try to figure it out. When they say to you, do not ask, everything is fine, that says a lot. You need to think about the question. If there is a clear, understandable, extremely logical explanation, then you need to figure it out. If this is the correct logic where the superlogic implanted, then the logic will not destroy this superlogic, but it will destroy all the stupidity that unfortunately accompanies most of the tantric practices brought from east to west. This is a very large layer of knowledge, theoretical and practical, which is accompanied by a trail of things that are not entirely appropriate for the modern Western world. They are simply not critically drugged, and then, strangely enough, they lead people aside. Instead of leading people to freedom, they lead them into some jungle. This is where logic can help. Logic is absolutely unnecessary. It saves us from having to poke around and wallow in stupidity. Therefore, the three principles of yoga are very important just to understand what we are doing and why we return to where we started. And questions. Okay. Email your questions to asktantrayoga@gmail.com.